Hello and welcome to the Beyond Biotech podcast number 126 as we head into 2025. Jessica Owens and Iana Dimkova are co-founders of Initiate Ventures, a female-led venture capital firm and studio that launched recently with a $45 million debut fund. And I'm happy to say our guest this week is one of those co-founders, Jessica Owens. It's a fairly recent launch, the company. I wonder if you could tell me a bit about your backgrounds and how the company came to be started and when. And
Sure, I'm happy to. Thanks so much for having me. And maybe I'll just start out with a little bit on my background because I think it's relevant to the forming of Initiate Ventures. I started my career as a scientist, and I've always really loved the place where discovery meets products and innovations that help people. And so I actually started my career at the CDC in Atlanta in infectious disease and then moved out to Stanford in the Department of Cancer Biology. And I was, happened to hit the dot-com boom just right when everyone was getting a job in industry. And so I spent about the first decade of my career outside the lab in all the ways that innovative biotech and life sciences companies can be financed. So I was an equity research analyst, I was an investment banker. I went to business school and then I worked at in R&D finance at Genentech. And then after business school, I joined the team at Kleiner Perkins and really fell in love with startups. And we were investing at a pretty rapid clip at that time. Kleiner had a big life sciences team, and I invested across therapeutics, diagnostics, medical devices, and even healthcare services. And we also did a lot of company formation during those times. And so, I think life sciences VCs have been doing that for quite some time. It's not a new model. And, falling in love with startups, I spent then the next decade of my career building them and launching them and operating in them. So between kind of Kleiner Perkins and today, I was a member of the founding team of 7 startups. And then most recently, I was a co-founder of GRAIL. And I helped launch the company. I led the team that spun it out of Illumina. I was actually just brought in to spin the company out. I didn't actually work at Illumina at the time. But GRAIL was a fabulous experience and really, had this visionary concept, even it's almost now a decade ago, believe it or not, time flies, of putting together data science and engineering and clinical medicine and trying to build this really hard product to detect cancer early from blood. And, of course, the company was acquired by Illumina in 2021, and I was happy to reunite with some old friends from my past. And I had met my partner, Iana Dimkova, when I was fundraising for GRAIL, and she was at GE Ventures. And then Randy Scott, who is a co-founder in our Initiate Ventures and studio. Randy was 3-time public company CEO. He's 3-time founder and public company CEO, multiple founder. We were reconnected, and it was like a great thing to serendipitously cross paths with him again, because I always wanted to work with Randy again in my career. And at the time, we were thinking about, this model of company building and also, backing companies, but doing it through the lens of people who'd really built companies before. And, Iana had been an entrepreneur before she'd gone to GE Ventures. I had done venture first and then become an entrepreneur. And so we bring that sort of founder focus to what we're building at Initiate. So Initiate is an early stage venture capital firm. We are trying to raise the bar for founders by really being true partners to the leaders we back, not in a formulaic way, but by really meeting companies where they are with the support and the willingness to roll up our sleeves. We invest inception through Series A rounds. So we fund seed and Series A companies like many VCs. And then in our venture studio, we also act as co-founders. And so we're willing to kind of work with something when it's, just some IP out of an institution or, a concept on a piece of paper and roll up our sleeves and work together on turning that into a company. We focus at kind of the frontier innovations at the intersection of healthcare, life sciences, and technology. And what that means for us specifically in sector-wise is that we focus in biopharma tech and services, life sciences, SaaS, R&D tools, precision medicine, and health tech. And so we try to really bring this ethos of having walked in our founder's shoes and having been on both sides of the table as both venture capital investors and, of course, operators ourselves. So that's kind of something that flows throughout our strategy. And our portfolio, will range in probably 12 to 15 companies, and we'll do about half of them from inception and the other half from broadly things we come across in the ecosystem.
Obviously, there are quite a lot of venture capital companies out there. What are you kind of setting your stall out as the differentiating factor, I guess, that you're going to be doing differently to others?
Yeah, so great question. So I think one of the things we have seen over many decades in life sciences and healthcare VC is there's many firms who have focused at kind of 0 to 1, the startup phase. Most of those are very therapeutics focused. And so we bring real sector expertise to not just the therapeutics, but the surround, right? So we invest in the pharma tech and services space. We invest in precision medicine and diagnostics. We invest in life sciences tools. So I think that is a differentiator. You don't see a ton of people doing 0 to 1 with the sector focus that we bring in health tech as well. And then the other piece is that we actually do roll up our sleeves and wear several different business or commercial hats, depending on what the company needs. And so we bring a very, I think, experienced commercial mindset to the earliest stages, both in investing and in venture creation. And I think that's a real advantage today. The third piece I would say is that everyone loves to talk about the places where sort of technology and biology, meet, or where healthcare and technology meet. And what I would say is that we've worked in the organizations where those functional groups have to actually talk to each other and have to collaborate and have to work. And I think the human aspect of that is something that cannot be understated, actually how challenging and difficult that can be, even with the smartest and most well-intentioned teams, to create a culture where 1 + 1 can really equal 3 with respect to product development when you bring in people from disciplines where they don't necessarily speak the same language. And so coming at those types of collaborations early and thinking about what is the organization going to look like a year from now, and how do we create a framework where the synergies between these teams have to really thrive. I think you see a lot of times, companies that are either very data science heavy, but may not have the clinical experience of, kind of what it takes to bring things through product development, or, you have a very clinical heavy organization and the engineers or the data scientists are kind of viewed as like a nice to have. And it still blows my mind that it's just kind of human nature, right? You grow up with what you know. And I think that's another thing that we bring that's really unique is having navigated those waters before. We didn't invent the inception model, but I think the way that we come at it is kind of a roll up your sleeves and very milestone and operationally focused.
And enthusiasm too. You can tell that from the way you're speaking. You definitely bring enthusiasm to it.
I think you have to love it. It's such a hard thing. You talk to so many people, and I was just talking to someone yesterday. I think you really have to have a passion for it because it's hard, and biology doesn't work as predicted, and healthcare is full of incentives that make no sense, right? And so you really do have to have a fire in your belly for it.
I noticed on your website it mentions revitalizing healthcare.
Yeah.
I wonder how you kind of define what that means and also how you're looking to achieve that.
Yeah, that word is, I'm glad you mentioned that. No one has asked us about that before. And I really love this word vital. And I think that, we talk all the time about how healthcare has become sick care. And I think that really what has been lost, right, is this sense of vitality, and the foundation of like any vital life is one where, your body's working and you feel good. And we really liked that word, and we don't see it used that often. But for us, it's really about that mission for all of our companies to build things that improve people's lives and to also think really big. We don't want to do, maybe that's the nature of the beast, right? When you do things that are I said that, we got to love this because it's hard, but kind of we're also drawn to hard problems. And so those are the ones that I think have great potential to help not just revitalize healthcare, but give people hope. There's a lot of hope in what we do. And I'll give you an example. I talked to someone last week, and this is like it's early days for this company. And it was really just kind of a question about advice for which direction to take a company based on my experience at GRAIL and in early detection of cancer. And the vision for this company was not even just one company, but kind of what the future of oncology and cancer care could look like. And the concept was, do a blood test and you see these early cancer signals that may not even be cancer yet, but then you can treat this cancer that you may not even know where it is with a vaccine that essentially makes the precancer go away. And so like even needing to get to is it in the lung? Is it in the colon? You'd be so far ahead of that you just treat and then wait and see if the signal comes back again and then treat again. And it was such a futuristic vision. I was captivated by it because even in all the work that I've done for early cancer detection and keeping people well as long as you can, this one I was like, I'd like to subscribe to that vision of the future. Tons and tons of work would have to be done between now and then. But to me, that's kind of the revitalizing is the reminder to really, swing for the stands.
What's your approach to sifting out what is realistic from what might be unrealistic, I guess?
Right. Yeah. And so that specific discussion was around how long it would take to prove all of this out and what would be, it was kind of a brainstorm on would there be capital efficient, small ways to get there that weren't the whole of that entirety? Are there small pieces you could pick off and make a meaningful impact in specific, for example, in lung cancer or in another specific cancer? From a scientific perspective, I can take you through how I kind of think about meeting entrepreneurs and companies, and then how do you kind of get to the scientifically, is this feasible and credible, and how would you then need to demonstrate it? I like when I first meet with a company and an entrepreneur, in the very first meeting, I like to just believe that it works. I like to just suspend disbelief and really see the world through the eyes of a founder who, sees a better future, sees things differently than we see it today. And, kind of how does the world look if all of this works? I like to just kind of go with it in the first meeting because, you're trying to figure out so many things as an investor. I think the first thing is just kind of like, is this something I can get excited about? Is this a person I can work with? And then as you figure out the markets and understand the patient population, or if it's, a life sciences SaaS tool, it's, if you understand the way that the users will interface with it, then you start to get down into the nitty gritty of things like the scientific diligence and intellectual property and more of those, and double click in those areas. I rely on, scientific experts and people with a lot of industry and domain expertise in a specific area once we get to that point. And so it's important, obviously, to talk to, whatever scientific advisors are around the company, but then to vet that with, independent people in your network, or people even who may be helpful to the company because they have a great deal of experience. And so I like to conduct scientific diligence in a way that hopefully the conversations with external advisors or people external to the company could also be useful to the company, even if we decide maybe not to go forward, that those conversations are hopefully elevating their thinking as well. And that's not always the case, but it's nice if you can. I did diligence on a company I didn't invest in, and I introduced them to someone who I thought was great from my time at GRAIL, and he's still a scientific advisor to them. And so, because you can't invest in everything, but, that wasn't for the science. Their science was great. And so I think in the end, my scientific knowledge has a shelf life, and it expired when I left the lab. And so I have to rely on others to stay current.
You have Initiate Ventures and Initiate Studios. Could you kind of explain what that is and how they're different and how they work together?
Yeah. So we refer to, Initiate Ventures is, as many venture firms are, early stage seed and Series A fund. We raised and closed almost $50 million in Fund 1. And Initiate Studios is what we refer to as the venture creation arm of our platform. And so about half of the companies in our ventures portfolio will be born from work that happens in our venture studio. In the studio, we act as a co-founder with our companies. We take on a pretty significant scope of work in those collaborations. And we work together to get the company to the milestones it would need to go out and successfully raise a seed round. The ventures participates in those rounds, the rounds that follow, but we don't lead them. And that is so to avoid conflict and align incentives. And so when we act like a co-founder in a venture studio, in our Initiate Studios companies, we will participate in the fundraising, but we won't price it. So it's a way to essentially align all of our incentives as founders in those companies together. And what works then best for the company, it works best for us as well. Then we go out and, try and raise it, whatever valuation and terms make sense in the market, but let the market set the price.
Have you already started working with companies?
Yeah, from our venture studio, we've launched 5 companies. One of them is still in stealth. And then on the venture side, we've also made a couple investments. All of the companies that we have launched at this point have gone on to receive outside funding. So, have gone and raised proper follow-on rounds. And so from the ventures perspective, they are part of our portfolio as well. I can tell you a little bit about a couple of them just as examples. There is a life sciences SaaS company in our portfolio called Cornerstone AI. So Cornerstone is working with data scientists across biopharma and healthcare to tackle the huge problem of messy, big healthcare data. And they're actually using AI to clean and prepare data for analysis. And so the founder of that company had been a founder before. He was a CTO of several companies, one of which was sold to Medidata, and had experienced and grappled with the problem of not that there is not enough data in healthcare, but that it's so messy that to make sense of it, real world data or even laboratory data, clinical data, it requires an enormous amount of cleaning preparation that takes time and computer scientists months. So literally heads and months. And so we worked with Mike on the founding of Cornerstone to bring a product to market that could plug into pipelines and ultimately provide analysis and preparation mostly of the data for cleaning. And it uses AI to do that. And so that's one of the companies in our portfolio. Cornerstone is now beyond their seed round and they're doing great. And then on the other end, we have a clinical research company called Macro Trials. And so this is a company bringing the data of patients and physicians at like the site level into clinical research and scaling what physicians can do in their own practices and bringing each of those patients into clinical research, especially in diseases that are hard to recruit into studies. So patient populations that are challenging to find. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's rare disease. It just means that like the enrollment criteria may cause that a smaller patient population to be required in order to study a specific aspect of disease. So that's kind of on the clinical development side. And then more in the like biology world, the stealth code that I'm working on, really excited about right now is essentially replicating the information you could get in a biopsy of an organ by ascertaining that information from a blood draw. And so the places in which we have seen to date talk of liquid biopsy almost always refers to oncology, right? And so looking at what's happening in a tumor and doing that from a blood draw. What we're doing in this company is applying that type of approach to kind of all the other diseases that aren't cancer. And we're starting with liver disease and a disease called MASH. It used to be called NASH. And this is a metabolic associated steatohepatitis. So that's MASH, that's a new acronym. And the first drug was recently approved in the United States for MASH last year. It's called Resdifra. And this is a huge patient population. It's a progressive disease. It's the number one cause of hepatocellular carcinoma today. And there is also a lot of data that around the GLP class of drugs being effective in this patient population. And so we are building a biopsy of the liver from blood in order to appropriately diagnose, stage the disease, and determine which patients are eligible to be on which drug. And then determining if they're responding to drug. And over time, this is going to become a combination therapy regimen. The good news is, though, that there are a ton of drugs in the pipeline right now. And so I think this is going to be a huge indication over time and has the potential to really improve patients' lives. Liver disease has been kind of a silent killer for the last 2 decades, and it's going hand in hand with the obesity epidemic in the United States. And so the good news is livers are also really regenerative and they can heal. And so with proper medication and therapy, I'm really hopeful that 10 years from now, we may be talking about the same way that like hepatitis C kind of has become a treatable disease, the number one cause of liver cancer, hopefully being shrunk down to very small numbers of hepatocellular carcinoma over time.
I was going to ask you about other potential investments, but maybe you're not looking for other companies at the moment.
We are. So I'm excited. In 2025, I've been looking at a lot of things in the space of preclinical research and R&D at the intersections of, I mean, everyone's looking at things that AI is everywhere, but I think there's some really great use cases that rather than, we're seeing a ton around drug discovery, drug design, but there's also some very high value use cases in the space of ADME talks and places where I think we're going to start to see these models make real progress over the next couple of years. And so I'm looking very closely at the space of preclinical development, the entire value chain and where technology interfaces with that through the lens of biopharma tech and services. And then we also invest in tools, and we haven't made a tools investment yet in this fund. And then my partner, Iana, leads a lot of our health tech investing. So I've given you a very kind of bio lens on this, but we're excited about the space of fertility and the continuing trends of consumerization in healthcare. There's still a lot of good stuff going on out there. I'm also hopeful, in 2025, I think we'll start to see kind of a recalibration on this market correction. It'll be slow. We all have to kind of weather through that. But I think that there's still a lot of interesting, as some VCs are really grappling with bigger portfolios of companies. And we were lucky in a sense with our timing that, we were kind of raising the fund and getting started in 2021. So we don't have exposure to a big portfolio of companies that now we have to kind of push through. So yeah, we are actively deploying in 25 and there's a lot of interesting stuff out there.
That's good. How do you evaluate the potential success of a startup that you might be interested in working with?
Business model to me is a really important piece. There's plenty of if you build it, they will come investors out there. I'm not one of those. And so business model is really crucial. I think we're reminded of that now more than ever. In these moments of correction, business model becomes everything. And so I think you have to ask yourself, ultimately, what's the path to building something with lasting significance? I really like that phrase. When I look back at the things I've done, the things as an entrepreneur, not all of my companies work. You have to feel your way into these things. And when I think about the things that worked the best, those are the bold visions where you're building something that will forever change an industry. And so that's one of the criteria I like to apply to thinking about how to build a portfolio is if this works, does the way that the world works after the success of this product or company, is it forever changed? And when I look back at the companies I've worked on that didn't work, if I had applied, and these were my own companies, my own startups, if I had applied that lens maybe to all of my own startups, well, they still don't work for other reasons, but that's a good starting point.
How hands-on do you get when you're working with other companies?
Having been on both sides, I will say as hands-on as leadership would like. At the end of the day, if I'm an investor, I'm an investor. So that's, my job is to operate as an investor and be as helpful as I can to the company. If there are things that, take a little heavier lift, we don't shy away from that. And it really is case by case. So we really meet leadership where they are. And we have a great team. And so we provide a lot of operational support to our companies when they're in the 0 to 1 phase, right before that seed. So we have all of those capabilities and we have, a network of people around us who provide those capabilities. And so to the extent, companies want to tap into that, even when they're later and further along in their life cycle, we're happy to provide that help, but very much depends. And as companies get further along in their trajectory, fundraising strategy and commercial introductions and customer introductions, those become increasingly important. Whereas early on, we might do something like a culture and values workshop. I wore a lot of hats at GRAIL. I was marketing, comms, BD, a lot of different hats, writing the initial business plan, pitching the business, fundraising. And so we'll take on any kind of spin through a deck, give feedback, help put the pitch together, all the way through to, all right, we've got to figure out, there's this big milestone out here and, we got to figure out how to get some non-dilutive capital into the company to hit that milestone and then go out and fundraise, and we'll tackle that as well.
Has what is attracting venture capital changed or evolved over the years? I'm thinking especially post-pandemic and now that AI and machine learning seems to be so ubiquitous.
Yeah. So we're definitely in this kind of AI bubble right now. I'm incredibly optimistic about the potential for the industry, but I will have to say, honestly, I think we're in a moment of complete overblown hype. There are firms that are saying like, we won't take a meeting unless there's like an AI strategy. And in the end, getting back to kind of business model and game-changing products, in the end, it's just a piece of the engine, and it's got to fuel something that creates outsized value. And so I do think right now we're in a moment where, and it's not good for the industry, these moments of like, oh, everything has to be AI. And then all the scrutiny is placed on the first companies to ever deploy those methods. Where are they now? And do they have more molecules in the clinic? And yeah, that's the right benchmark, right? Are those programs that are producing those drugs able to shorten the time or produce the probability of technical success is higher for all of these? And I think it's a little early to say, it's still too soon to tell. What I do know, though, is if you think about companies like Recursion and even GRAIL, we really had incredibly sophisticated data science engineers who, when you think about all of the signals in the blood and the vast amount of sequencing we were doing and the huge number of patients and the many types of cancer, right? I mean, it becomes something only a computer can do. And so I think that we as investors tend to, unfortunately, glob onto these categories with buzzwords, and they get overhyped. And then you get to a point where there's the completely predictable, oh, it wasn't as, why are these performing the way that the wish and the dream? But it's, at the end of the day, it's biology. It's not all the words on the internet. And chemistry, I think there's going to be more low-hanging fruit there. But in the end, chemistry still has to interact with biology when you put it into a human being. And every person is a snowflake, and everyone's biology is slightly different. And so I am incredibly optimistic about where the whole field is going, but I think there's still a lot of training to do in these models. And I think it's going to just take time. And what I'm seeing right now is these very deep applications in, I'll pick one. We don't have a company in this space, but I mentioned before, like in the ADME tox land, right? And all of those models are going to have to be trained and organ by organ, right? So cardiac tox, liver tox, right? And so it's a completely doable proposition. It's just going to take time and dollars and smart scientists. Investors love to have like all these buzzwords and catchphrases, and I'm more of like the garden variety of what's the secret to weight loss, or, it's like exercise, fewer calories, balanced diet, sleep, relationships. So I tend to be that kind of an investor. It's just kind of what are the basic building blocks that we know make things successful. And the computational methods are now just, I think, accelerating things. It's not the whole thing. You got to go back to the business model. In the end, you got to create something that works better than everything else. And that's where the real value creation comes.
I guess kind of connected to that in a way. Obviously, everybody wants to make money, but do venture capital companies look to invest in companies that are developing, as an example, new antibiotics that aren't going to sell for millions of dollars, but would have a major positive impact?
It's a very neglected area, and infectious disease across the board is a pretty neglected space, aside from a few blockbusters like the HCV drug that have really changed medicine. Infectious disease is really tough because the incentives in the market do not reward innovation. And, when we look back even at this most recent pandemic, it's in some ways completely miraculous. It is completely miraculous, I think, what the world pulled off with respect to testing and therapeutic development. And at the same time, it's hard to invest in, think about like a rapid diagnostic or something, something that we all valued so dearly during the pandemic, right? You wanted to get your hands on them so that you could try to live your life, as responsibly as possible. But then in the non-pandemic world, who are the buyers for those products. And many of those companies ended up, shifting their business back to whatever their core business was before, or frankly, going away and going out of business. And so I think infectious disease is a really important and neglected space. And it absolutely has to do with, market incentives.
And how important are ESG considerations in working with startups?
Yeah, I think they are very important because it is, I think, a good business to think about these things through the lens of all of the externalities that are created by business generally. And depending on your specific topic within ESG, I mean, this is an area where that I've actually been really interested in on the health tech side. I mean, we could talk about any number of topics in ESG. Hospitals create a boatload of waste. There's a ton of garbage created by hospitals. Everything, even back to we used to autoclave everything and have, all of these instruments were metal, and everything is plastic and disposable now. I've been actually looking for companies working in that space. I think it could be really interesting to consider lower waste hospital supply strategies. I think that could be a cool business. And I haven't seen a lot of those, but that's just kind of one. I've just kind of picked a lane there. And I think that all of the kind of human aspects of ESG will continue to be something that business generally has to grapple with. There are unconscious bias is a part of the human brain. And I think of it through the lens of people neither being good or bad, but being human. It doesn't really make us that interesting. It just makes us human. But what you ultimately want in a startup is a culture and a place where people can bring their best. And so through the lens of high functioning organizations and startups trying to do things that are really, really hard, you need absolutely a culture where people can contribute at their most optimal level. The culture at GRAIL was really hard. It was hard for a lot of reasons that don't have anything to do with, well, it's just kind of nuts and bolts of leadership transitions. And it was hard for a lot of reasons. So many smart people, but the culture was challenging and there was a lot of leadership turnover. And I think in the end, when I finally left GRAIL, I was like, I don't have anything left to give. Like, I have given this company everything I have. And that's what I told the incoming CEO at the time. You need to put someone in my seat who's fresh, because I'm just wrung out. I'm exhausted. I've been here 5 years. And I think you're going to need somebody who has more to give than I have. In a culture that is one where people feel supported and challenged at the same time, I hope that in grappling and tackling these hard products and bringing really important things to market, it really does require everyone's brain to be operating optimally. And I think in cultures where all too often in business, these cultures they start at the beginning, and I don't know how easy it is to fix them, honestly. I think once a culture goes sideways, it's really tough to change the way that people, it's all the norms, right? It's who gets hired, fired, and promoted. Cultures build themselves. You don't build them intentionally. And I think they're very hard to change. And so kind of taking your ESG question down that road as well. In the end, people make stuff happen. It's all about people.
What are you seeing as some potential trends in 2025?
I am following as I think the whole world in our sector is, the GLP-1 story with such a fascination. I'm really intrigued by the applications outside of obesity and diabetes. And I mean, liver disease is the tip of the iceberg. I was heartened to see news of expansion into studies in addiction and mental health. I'm fascinated by all of that. I'm excited to see where that lands. In the United States, this is outside of the kind of range of or purview of my investing criteria, but I think that the public and government has just completely ignored this opioid epidemic that is killing so many people. And I'm hopeful that there will be more investment into therapeutics to help people who are addicted to medications that are industry created. So that's an area that I'm excited by. I'm very excited about the whole GLP-1 space. And then there's opportunity that sort of radiates off of that. And that kind of is like full circle back to the, investing in a liver health company that is really driven by some of those medications. 2025, also, I'm optimistic that we will start to see, as we've seen, a little bit of a window reopen for therapeutics companies in the biotech markets. I think there's still some a lot that needs to be worked out of the system from the correction of the investments that occurred in the timeframe of 2021. But I hope that we will see more investment into the surrounding technology space. I'm a big believer in tools and diagnostics and pharma tech and services. And there has just been a complete lull of investment in those spaces as, the sort of biotech itself and biopharma is recovering from the investments that were made. And a lot of companies, little companies, were over-invested in the tools and diagnostic space. So I'm looking forward to more of that working its way out and more investment in those spaces. And I think there's a lot to be excited about just on the fundamentals of the science. I really do think our industry is in such a fascinating place. And I think on a very just foundational level, we're entering, kind of a great decade for our industry. And the look ahead I have is very optimistic. So I'm excited to see what comes just in terms of basic science discovery, because that fuels so much that ends up being important in our industry.
And what about from your company's perspective, I guess, 2025 and forward, what are you looking to?
Yeah, so we'll be making seed investments. We're excited to look at companies who probably mostly at the seed stage will be focusing in 2025. We may do an Series A. We've done a bunch of our inceptions. At this point, when you think about like a portfolio construction, you want to do the things that are hard and take more time at the beginning of the portfolio and let those things grow in advance. And so we'll be focusing on investing this year, hopefully do 2 or 3 investments in our firm. And we have a great team we've been building as well as a new firm. And so I feel like we have all the pieces in place, my colleagues, Alex and Caroline, and then my partner, Iana. So, I feel like at Initiate, we have the right people in the right seats on the bus, as they say, and feel really grateful for my team and, the people I get to work with. The CEOs in our portfolio are awesome, and I'm feeling good about 2025.
Definitely a company going places, and a good look at what we can maybe expect in 2025 in the industry. Don't forget to check out the latest news and articles over at Labiotech.eu, and I hope wherever in the world you are, you have a great week ahead. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll join us again next time for another Beyond Biotech.